Robert here. I'm going to start off a bit differently as I'm considering different formats for this show. Of course, the general topic of how to get started in InfoSec, that's a given. It's a through line through all 56 episodes of the Hacker Mind thus far. I mean, it's not clear how you get a job, or even experience for that matter. Me, I sort of fell into this when I had my first day at ZDNet and my editor turned to me and said, "What do you know about computer viruses?" And the rest, as they say, is history. Well, as a reporter, I was in a position to learn as I wrote about information security. But what if you're on your own? What if you live in a remote area? In the last episode, I talked about capture the flag as a point of entry into the field. In this episode, I want to talk about another way to get experience in InfoSec: bug bounties. This is where you get paid to find bugs in a given project. And as you'll hear, in some cases, they'll even fly you around the world to learn how to hack. I hope you'll stick around. Welcome to the Hacker Mind, an original podcast from For All Secure. It's about challenging our expectations about the people who hack for a living. I'm Robert Vamosi, and in this Hacker Mind episode, I'm going to be giving some practical insight around the world of bug bounties through the eyes of various hackers I've previously interviewed on this show. Bug bounties are a way to learn vulnerability hunting and get paid while you do. Bug bounties. It's basically hacking for money. You find a vulnerability, and if the company validates it, they give you a bounty. And while there are some people out there earning up to $1 million doing this, there are advantages by just participating in the challenge. One of the best ways to build a resume before you get that opportunity to get hired is to participate in a bug bounty program. And if you want to be an application pen tester one day, your future employer might want to see some bug bounty work on your resume before they consider hiring you. In episode 9, I talked with Stok, who now works full-time for TrueSec, but at the time of the interview, he was still contracting. He still runs a popular YouTube channel where he talks about the world and culture of bug bounting. Here's the crazy thing. Prior to 2017, prior to attending DEF CON 25, Stok had never tried his hand at bug bounty.
Yeah, I never, I heard about bounties before, but I didn't really understand it then. I heard about this super cool hackers like Franz Rosen that hacked Netflix or got flown into Vegas to poke at, let's say, Snapchat or something. I don't know what kind of target they poked at. But that was just, for me, mind-blowing. Like, wow, super cool hackers that get to break into stuff. I want to do that. And it was all cloaks and daggers for me at that time. I had no idea. It just looks mysterious. Like, these guys poke at websites, break them down, and get paid a lot of money. I want to do that.
Something else happened to Stok at DEF CON that year. He began to make connections with some of the leaders in the bug bounty community that existed at the time.
I went to DEF CON that summer, for Hacker Summer Camp, and got invited, or more or less kind of social engineer myself into a HackerOne live hacking event. Used to be at the bar. And I saw these amazing hackers there that were sitting at their MacBooks and hacking away and just breaking this kind of software target that they were hacking. And I was so amazed that you were allowed to do that without getting getting legal issues with that. Like, are you guys allowed to do this? Can you actually just throw anything you want at it and there will be no reprimand, there will be no consequences? Like, yeah. And we get paid massive amount of money for it. I'm like, oh my God, this is too freaking amazing. How can I do this? And after that, I invested almost all my waking hours into learning web application pen testing, because coming from the infrastructure side, I never really poked at web apps. I still can't code for shit, to be honest. I know PowerShell. but you're not building any web apps with PowerShell, are you? So for me, that was kind of the whole journey. And I've been doing it, I wouldn't say daily, but almost since that day, poking at something. And it's really, really fun. And also coming from those days where if you just by accident poked at something, it will be like straight go to jail card, or you will be like, there will be a really problematic thing where people think that hackers equals criminals, which is not true at all. Hackers are just extremely curious people with a big skill set, and you can decide to be good or bad. I just fell in love with it, and I've been doing it ever since.
Okay, so you don't have to go to Hacker Summer Camp to get started in bug bounty hunting. Consider Jack Cable from episode 22. At a very early age, growing up on the north side of Chicago, all on his own, Jack discovered a security flaw in a cryptocurrency app, a flaw that opened the door to the world of bug bounties.
So this was then when I was in high school as a sophomore. Was working on building an integration for a cryptocurrency website. I wanted to let people, it was a Chrome extension. I wanted to let people pay money to other people like natively through Twitter. So I was working with their API and noticed that first of all, I could send $0 or 0 Bitcoin to someone. And that was weird, right? Because it's not really doing anything. And then I tried sending like negative $1 in Bitcoin. And to my surprise, what actually happened was instead of sending money to them, it would take money from their account. So I could effectively steal money from anyone's account. And what was really fortunate was that they had a bug bounty program. So I was able to actually work with them to get it fixed. I had a really positive response for it, got paid for it, which was nice. And that was my intro then to kind of the world of security.
And then there's Tim Becker from episode 7. He encountered bug bounties through professional bounty services online.
There's a website called HackerOne, which basically organizes bug bounties for a bunch of different software vendors. And they have a very wide selection of targets there. And so a lot of people I know, myself included, actually got started in bug bounties by looking for bugs in some HackerOne related vendors. So even things like looking for bugs in like the Python interpreter, or, some web servers of some sort. There's plenty of bounties to get started on.
Okay, so by now you're probably wondering what's the difference between being hired as a pen tester and being hired as a bug bounty hunter. Both individuals are brought in by companies wanting to harden their systems, but there are some differences.
The big difference between bug bounties and pen testing particularly is that you always do a lot of pen testing before you do bug bounties. So pen testing is a methodology and a rule set based testing, which means that you check the boxes. You make sure that it's like building a house, right? If you want to build a new house, you want to make sure that the power wiring is up to code. So somebody needs to do the work. The electrician has done the work, but then the certification guy that checks that everything is cool, he's kind of the pen tester. He checks all the boxes, makes sure that everything's safe, nothing is leaking out. Bounties, on the other hand, is when all this pen testing and hardening has been done, then bounties begin, because it's you don't get the wiring report that shows how the wires have been pulled through the house. You just have to guess, like, I wonder how they did the wiring on this house. And you need to start to map out things in a very different way. As a pen tester, you need to be an extremely good generalist. You need to know a little bit about a lot of stuff. But in bounties, you can be a super specialist in a very niched field and be like very researching a certain area. And because you don't need to write a coverage report, you just need to focus on one thing. I would say that is kind of the biggest difference.
Stok is quick to point out that bug bounty hunting is not for everyone. With pen testing, it's kind of a white box experience. You have visibility and some access to what you're testing. With pen testing, everything is scoped out, agreed to in advance, so you have some idea where you're going. With bug bounties, you have no idea how this relates to that. And for some people, not having that visibility having to poke around in the abyss, that's just not suitable for them.
The black box situation when it comes to bounties is almost ridiculous, but it's also that is for me extremely rewarding. I've got this hobby that I like to put down puzzles. So let's say I buy a box of a puzzle, and if we compare this to bounties, that would be if I bought a box but it didn't have any picture on the top of the box. It said that it might just contain a certain amount of pieces in it, and all the pieces are blank. So you need to start to sort up the pieces in their shapes. You need to try to figure out like what's going on here and doing all that stuff. And you can't ask anyone. You can't find any reference. You need to do the research. So maybe you will start to looking at, oh, this manufacturer of puzzles seems to do it almost the same every time because they have this framework that they just stamp down and it looks the same. So you start to look at the patterns, how the puzzle is built up and trying to figure things out. It's fully black on black. Everything is very blind. You need to rely on time-based attack frameworks. You need to approach it as if you need to try to figure things out on the way. And I really enjoy that. It's a very challenging target, usually.
So success with bug bounties depends a little bit on your own personal background.
And since I had a bit of, I won't say a bit, but since I had infrastructure background, I realized that I knew how things communicated. So race conditions, which is a very logical bug, is something that I focused primarily on because I figured that it was a fairly untested area. It wasn't on the top 10 of the OWASP top 10, and it's really, really hard to test for. But if you want to dedicate time to it and you're able to make it work in your way, it can have dire consequences for that company because you can more or less farm money or fiddle around with transactions, and it's also like very time based and yeah. So I choose that bug class. Like I'm just going to do one bug class, and then I'm going to find a bug on that. And once I'm done with that, I'm just going to keep on to the next target and the next target until I feel comfortable enough with the technique that I have to change to another bug class, learn as much as possible on that one, and then move on again. So I would say primarily 2.5 years in, and I still don't do XSSs that well because I never look for XSS.
So it seems like a lot of these early bug bounty vulnerabilities aren't on the level of Heartbleed. They're low-hanging fruit, and often that fruit can be found right there on your web browser.
I wouldn't say browsers are my favorite necessarily, but they're the most high impact currently, and they have the highest bounty rewards. It varies depending on, how difficult things are at the given time, basically. But at the current time, browsers, if an attacker was trying to actually write a full chain exploit.
So an exploit chain is an attack that involves multiple exploits or attacks. Hackers will usually not just use one method, they'll use several, chaining them together.
In particular, sandbox escape tends to be the bottleneck. And so the bounties kind of correspond to that relative difficulty. And currently, browsers are the bottleneck in most cases.
Others approach finding vulnerabilities differently, like concentrating on standard vulnerabilities first.
When I started doing this, I, of course, knew very little. So a lot of it was just looking at the standard vulnerabilities out there, kind of some cross-site scripting, direct object references, all of that. One of the interesting ones that caught my eyes early on was I'd read this post about someone this was with Starbucks. They found a way that they could exploit a race condition to redeem a gift card multiple times. And in doing so, they could get, I think it was kind of the infinite balance with Starbucks. So I saw that, and that was really crazy to me because it wasn't something that was immediately apparent. You'd have to do something kind of intricate to test for that.
But let's be clear. Pen testing can be conducted within 2 weeks. 1 week hands-on and 1 week report writing. Bug bounties, they're much more open-ended.
And it took me about From the day I started to I found my first bug, maybe it took like 2 months, but I had no prior experience in using tools like Burp or actually no web stuff. So what I did is that I just turned Burp on and then did my normal kind of browsing through any kind of website that I stumble upon, like the way that I always do it. And I looked at the traffic, almost like you're looking at the Matrix for the first time. You see that moving and all these green characters are just falling down. You have no idea what's going on. But these guys that sit there, they're like, I know what that is. That's like totally different part of this planet or another dimension. And you're like, whoa, those guys know what they're doing. But after a while, I got that sense too, because you see these posts and these GET requests going back and forth and server responses and the way things just communicated with each other. So I just trained my mind in understanding how web traffic flowed and how communication with third parties worked and what kind of flows that were inside web applications.
Most of what I did was just looking at different bug bounty programs across the board, seeing what I could find. Of course, I started from a position of like knowing some web development. I'd maybe like read about like SQL injection, whatnot, but had never actually seen that in practice. So a lot of it was just kind of figuring out the landscape, looking at different people's blogs, tutorials about what they'd found, and then going out and trying that out against different companies with bug bounty programs. So in that way, I think they were a really effective way for me to like learn in the real world. Here's what companies actually care about. Here's what they'll actually pay you for, which was nice.
So you found a vulnerability. Where should you report that vulnerability? There are many different types of bug bounty programs.
So that one in particular, I've seen a lot more race conditions, say.
A race condition is when a device or system attempts to perform two or more operations at the same time. But because of the nature of the device or system, the operations must be done in a particular sequence in order to be done correctly.
It's like with that, for instance, you can spend your balance twice and then kind of keep doing that back and forth to get infinite balance. I've seen less the negative amount just because in some ways it is so trivial that you would think everyone would hopefully think about. Like you shouldn't be able to send -$1 to someone else. But of course, software is complex and these bugs do happen. So while I've seen it less, I certainly wouldn't rule it out anywhere. Though I think, if you were to try it on PayPal right now, I think they've thought of that. But I started looking at that particularly for companies, cryptocurrency companies that had bug bounties, because of course, the impact of a race condition for cryptocurrency is potentially being able to steal all of the money held by, say, that exchange. And I ended up finding a couple really severe vulnerabilities that had I exploited them, I think in one case, like the wallet had maybe $100,000 that I could have just withdrawn right there and then if I'd wanted to. They paid me a fraction of that in a bug bounty, but the important part was just knowing that I could have done that and that now that's patched up, so no one can exploit that.
Knowing about race conditions helped Stok with his bug bounties.
The first bug bounty I got was a race condition, and it was in something called a VDP program, a vulnerable disclosure program. So it means that they don't pay any awards. And it's also the only bounty that I ever submitted that I never got paid for because I just particularly didn't know better, I guess.
Jack also applied his bug bounty knowledge to his cryptocurrency research as well.
So the one I actually started on, this was the one that hosted this cryptocurrency company, was a platform called Cobalt.io. And I think they pivoted a few years ago more to kind of doing like crowdsourced pen testing, so less on the bug bounties. But at a time, they had these open bug bounty programs that anyone could participate in. Most of them happened to be cryptocurrency companies, which was a lot of where I started out. So I did that, but kind of began to work more since HackerOne had more programs on there. I started doing that, and I think it's kind of interesting how like each of the bug bounty platforms has this incentive structure in place to keep you hacking on their platform. Like I just as well have started out doing this on BugCrowd, level up there and start getting more invitations to private programs. But I think that there definitely are strong incentives to like once you've done reasonably well on one platform to keep focusing on that because you get access to more private programs. I've done a bunch of the live hacking events, at least pre-COVID, which are a really great experience. And yeah, you get that kind of, in a way, staying loyal to a platform.
Individual companies can sponsor their own, such as Apple having an invite-only bug bounty in which you can offer up to $1 million for a specific type of bug, while Google and Intel have more open bounty programs. Then there are the aggregators, the ones like BugCrowd or HackerOne. They work with different and sometimes smaller companies and independent hackers, handling all the back end as necessary. They pay, and they often pay very well. And they have two tiers, one that is open for everyone, and one you have to be invited to, like Stok.
I joined HackerOne, and usually what happens when you join this platform is that you got a amount of different customers that you have a possibility to let's say, hack or research stuff at. And that's called like the open programs, the ones that are available for anyone that signs up. And that could be pretty daunting because they are well-tested grounds. They're very big. And so I was lucky enough to get after a while, got a private invite to a program that I started to test on. I guess I was lucky enough to find a couple of really cool bugs, like bugs that really put me on the map as a researcher. Like, well, this guy knows what he's doing. He doesn't have that high reputation, but he has a he's good at reproducing results. So I got invited to a live hacking event in Amsterdam because we're in Europe. I was flown there, and the target was Dropbox at the time. And I was nervous, but I got there and I met all these other amazing hackers, and I did terrible. I did so bad at that event that I didn't really know what to say. I sent in a couple of really crappy bugs, but then again, I got a network of cool people to talk to and created a lot of new friends and realized like this is finally the place where I totally belong. And I just said to myself that day, I'm going to do anything I can to get invited to another one. So after that event, I got home. I every week hour I had, I kind of more or less focused on learning more techniques or just practicing my skills. And eventually was lucky enough to get invited to Vegas for H1 702, which is HackerOne's flagship event. And once I was there, I submitted a couple of really nice crits and got some amazing awards during that stay. I can't disclose the targets, but it was a big time for me, a big thing to be there with all these amazing hackers and see that I could prove myself to deliver results under high pressure. So, and I've been doing that ever since.
Ultimately, Jack also settled on HackerOne. Again, not an endorsement, just these two researchers happened to land there. HackerOne has elevated bug bounties to live event spectacles, if you will. They actually fly people such as Jack and Stok around the country and around the world to HackerOne live events. They've even invited Jack, in this case, to the Pentagon.
Yep. So that's kind of a fun story, and that's something I, again, never thought I would have gotten into. So this was shortly after I'd started bug bounties. So I started them maybe when I was 15, and then maybe 6 months later, by the time I'd turned 16, I got an email from HackerOne. I think the subject was, "What if I told you the Pentagon wanted you to hack it?" And this was the first Hack the Pentagon program. So I was invited to participate in that. Since I was just starting out, I didn't know much. I found maybe two things, both that other people had already found. So didn't get paid for those, but still got acknowledged and got to see just like how cool this was, that like I was one of the first people being invited to actually hack into the Department of Defense's networks, and people were getting paid for it.
So for Jack, flying across the country, that was special. Hack the Pentagon was the first bug bounty in the history of the U.S. federal government and was spearheaded by the Digital Defense Service, DDS, a DoD team charged with bringing private sector talent and the best practices to transform the way the department approaches its own technology.
someone from HackerOne had posted that they were looking for people who would participate in the Pentagon program to fly out to their San Francisco office to meet with people from the DoD before the launch of Hack the Air Force. So I took them up on that. They flew me out to San Francisco. I was, I think, 16 years old. My parents just gave me the blessing, sent me off. And there I met the Defense Digital Service for the first time. And just really, I had, until that point, I'd never seen myself doing work for the government. It seemed kind of just this bureaucracy that you can't really improve. It's just always going to be mediocre. But I saw what they were doing. I saw that they were actually taking these practices that had kicked off in industry, bug bounties, engaging hackers who can do a much better job of identifying where flaws were. So that really stuck with me. And after that, I did the Hack the Air Force competition, where I ended up placing first in finding around 30 bugs, which eventually led me to working for Defense Digital Service out of high school.
So how then is a bug bounty event different from just another CTF?
It's usually structured this way. So one of them is either HackerOne. So it's either HackerOne or this Bug Crowd that, or Integrity, that have these live hacking events, usually those players. But HackerOne particularly, it works like this normally. So there's a vetting process where you get selected to be a part of the hackers that's going to be able to hack on that live event. And it's everything from, 20 to 100 people, depending on how big the event is. Like the flagship events in Vegas, a lot of people get invited. Some of the smaller ones, a lesser group. So if you make the cut and you get invited, there's a 2-week presentation from the day that the scope is getting released. Normally, that's how it works. In the beginning, you would get the scope on the same day, but hey, that doesn't work. Like, you can't take 30 people in and expect they found magic stuff in 8 hours. So everybody needs at least 2 weeks to prepare. So what they do is that they have a call and they release the scope and they explain what they're interested in finding. You can ask questions and talk to the program. And then it just kicks off, all hands in. And usually what I do is just eat, sleep, and function that target for 2 weeks until it's time to travel to the location. When you're at the location, then you have a small window for 2 or 3 hours where you get to send all your reports in. Once the reports are in, what is defined as the dupe window closes. So if you find the same vulnerability as somebody else after that period, you won't get paid anything because they don't have time to fix it, right? It's just bugs coming in, and then you hack for about 8 hours, and after that there's a break and there's open bar, and then it's a show and tell where the best bugs get reported, or some of the bugs that are creative and fun are getting shared with that group that are there, and then it's just a party and it's all over.
For others, finding and reporting bugs happens the right way.
Typically with bug bounties, they prefer that you report right away if you can. So if the bug is like currently affecting users, it's probably best to report right away. And typically the bounty vendors, I know this is true for Google in particular, will give you some time to finish writing an exploit for it if they want to offer you extra for proving that it's exploitable. So if you're reporting a bug like this to at least Google Chrome, but probably other vendors, if you report the bug immediately and then take some time to write the exploit, you can still get the full reward for the exploit.
So there are strategies for successful bug bounties. For example, you're given some scope. Slack, for example, doesn't just let you comb over all of their code. You have a section of that code to review. So to be successful, you come in focusing, say, on race conditions. And if so, is that then a sustainable model for you, the hacker, to continue? I mean, there are $1 million bug bounty people out there, but what's it like for the rest of us?
Certainly heard of examples of people that find like a nice, basically a nice methodology for finding similar types of bugs in all kinds of different products. And like, for instance, on HackerOne, there are public scoreboards of how much money certain users have made. And there are certainly people who have made in the millions of dollars from bug bounties. But I would also say that, in my personal opinion, bug bounties aren't compensating well enough to make bounty hunting like a stable career for a lot of people, which I think it should be able to do. I think the security of software would benefit greatly if bounties were a little higher and more people could pursue this as a full-time career.
Of course, there are the legitimate ways to report your vulnerabilities, which we just discussed. But there are also illegitimate ways as well. The alternative to a bug bounty program, it's the dark markets, the dark web, where exploits have prices as well.
I would say that there are sort of like private market prices for these different vulnerabilities, where if you aren't responsibly disclosing them and rather you're selling them for profit to some sort of exploit broker or something, there are publicly known prices for the different types of vulnerabilities and in the target software that they're in. So you can kind of get a sense of how difficult or important different bug classes are based on those private market prices. And typically Google Chrome and Android bugs are the highest value currently. And I would say that indicates that those are kind of the hardest targets at the moment. But it varies with time. Sometimes iOS full chains are higher value. So
fortunately, Tim works at a company that builds in time for him to do the legitimate type of hacking.
It's technically part of my job at Theory. Basically, when we have time in between contracts, we're doing vulnerability research on major software and collecting bug bounties and stuff. Probably my most interesting targets would be like operating system kernels. And I definitely have fun doing it, so I would likely be doing it either way. But so yeah, I would say the bounties are just a nice addition.
That said, not everything is perfect, at least not yet.
I think having a bounty program at all is great and certainly a step in the right direction because, I mean, it has a proven track record of improving the security of the software. But I would argue that it could be improved much more if the incentives were a little higher for people to devote the time to acquire the general bug hunting skills, but also the domain-specific skills for that specific software, which takes a lot of time on its own. And if it was rewarded a little better, you could have more experts on that specific software that are finding vulnerabilities and reporting them.
Okay, I want to thank Stok, Tim Becker, and of course Jack Cable for sharing their experiences on the world of bug bounties. Hey, I'm thinking of shaking things up a bit at the Hacker Mine. DM me on Twitter at Robert Vamosi and tell me what you like and what you don't like. For the Hacker Mine, I will always be Robert Vamosi.